You, planting corn and beans in the middle of nowhere, while my wife and I get the $2 million penthouse, all fair and square. Right, Mom? The sound of Stephen's laughter echoed down the courthouse hallway. Samantha, my daughter-in-law, covered her mouth, pretending to hide her chuckle, but her eyes were glittering with mockery. Their lawyer, Maxwell, a man in an impeccable gray suit, smiled smugly as he reviewed his documents. They were so sure of their victory they didn't even try to hide their contempt. I clutched my old handbag to my chest, feeling the humiliation burn my cheeks. But I kept my head high, because in less than an hour, when Judge Bryant announced his ruling, those smiles were going to disappear from their faces, and not even their lawyer could do anything to stop it. My name is Helen. I am 63 years old, and my hands are marked by a lifetime of working the land. Every callus, every wrinkle, every scar tells the story of a woman who never had anything handed to her. I've spent my whole life in the country, planting corn and beans on the land I inherited from my parents. I am not a city woman. I don't understand fancy high-rises or expensive restaurants. My world has always been the sunrise over the fields, the smell of damp earth, hands dirty with honest work. And I was never ashamed of it, until my own son started to feel ashamed of me. I was widowed 25 years ago. My husband died in an accident when Stephen was just 13. From that day on, my only reason for living was to give my son everything I never had. I worked cleaning houses in town, getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to be on time. I sold half the land my parents left me to pay for his private school. I skipped meals to buy him new clothes. I walked for miles under the sun to save on bus fare and give him money for his textbooks. I mended my own clothes so he could always look sharp. I never complained. I never made him feel the weight of those sacrifices. Watching Stephen grow up healthy, educated, with opportunities, was my greatest joy. And I succeeded. My son graduated with honors. He landed an excellent job in the city. He started making more money than I had ever seen in my entire life. He met Samantha, an ambitious lawyer from a wealthy family. They got married in an elegant ceremony, one I showed up to in my only good dress, feeling completely out of place among all those important people. But I was proud. My son had made it. That was all that mattered. Or so I thought. Because little by little, something changed. The visits became less frequent, the calls shorter, the excuses more elaborate, and when they did come to visit, it wasn't to see me. It was to talk about the land. The land. That small property in the middle of the countryside my parents left me. 15 acres of fertile soil where I grew my vegetables, my corn, my beans. My home, my livelihood, my legacy. To me, that land was sacred. Every tree planted by my father's hands, every furrow opened by my own. But to Stephen and Samantha, it was just a business opportunity. They started with subtle suggestions. Mom, you're getting too old to work so hard. Mom, that property is so lonely, so far from everything. Mom, you should come live with us in the city. I gently refused their offers. This was my place. Here were my memories, my peace, my life. But the suggestions turned into pressure, and the pressure turned into demands. One day they showed up unannounced. Samantha brought a man with a briefcase. He's an appraiser, Mom, Stephen said with a smile that no longer reached his eyes. We just want to know what your property is worth, for your peace of mind. I said nothing. I let them do their measurements, take their pictures, review the property deeds. The appraiser left, promising to send the report. Stephen and Samantha stayed for dinner, but it wasn't like before. They no longer talked about their lives, their plans, how they were. They only talked about the land, about how much it would be worth if they sold it, about how well off I'd be in a comfortable nursing home where I wouldn't have to worry about a thing. I listened in silence, feeling something break inside my chest. The report arrived 2 weeks later. The land was worth $5 million. The area was seeing major urban sprawl. Developers were buying up everything around it. My little patch of countryside had turned into a gold mine, and Stephen and Samantha knew it. The visits multiplied, but they no longer came alone. They brought lawyers. They brought documents. They brought rehearsed arguments about why I should sign the land over to them now. It's better for tax purposes, Mom. This way, we avoid problems later. Besides, you don't need it anymore. Every time I refused, their faces hardened a little more. The smiles became more forced, the goodbyes colder. Until one day, Stephen lost his patience. "You're selfish," he yelled at me in the middle of my kitchen. "I gave you everything. I sacrificed my time, my money, my life for you. And this is how you repay me? By holding on to a piece of land you don't even know how to use?" Samantha put her hand on my son's shoulder, calming him with that soft voice she used when she wanted to manipulate. "What Stephen means to say, Helen, is that we could do so much with that property. Develop it. Make it productive. While you just plant corn and beans." She said it as if it were something shameful, as if my life of honest work was something to be embarrassed about. That day, I asked them to leave, and they didn't come back. Until the court summons arrived. The legal demand arrived in my hands on a Tuesday morning. The mailman handed me the envelope with a look of pity I will never forget. My hands trembled as I opened the document. The words danced in front of my eyes. Mentally incompetent to manage assets. Risk of financial loss. Petition for legal guardianship. My own son was declaring me incompetent. He was treating me as if I were a senile old woman who couldn't take care of herself. As if my 63 years of life, of work, of sacrifice, were worth nothing. I sat in my old rocking chair and cried. I cried for hours. I cried for the boy I raised, for the man he had become, for the mother I was, and who apparently was no longer good enough. But when my tears dried, something else grew inside me. It wasn't sadness. It was determination. I went to town that same afternoon. My savings were small, but enough to hire Paige, a young lawyer who had just opened her office. She welcomed me warmly, without judging my simple clothes or my farmer's hands. She listened to my whole story, taking notes attentively. When I finished, she closed her notebook and looked me straight in the eye. "Helen, this isn't just a property dispute. This is elder abuse. Your son and daughter-in-law are using the legal system to steal what's yours. But we are going to fight this, and we are going to win." Her words gave me the strength I needed. For the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't alone. Paige worked quickly. She requested copies of all the property documents. She reviewed every paper, every signature, every date. And then she found something. The $2 million penthouse where Stephen and Samantha lived was mortgaged to the hilt, and I was listed as the co-signer. My signature was right there, on documents I had never seen. "Did you sign this?" Paige asked, showing me the papers. I shook my head. I had never put my signature on those documents. I had never agreed to co-sign for anything. But there was my name, my signature expertly forged. Samantha, the lawyer, had used her knowledge to commit fraud, and now they wanted my land to save their luxury home, which they couldn't afford. That revelation changed everything. Paige hired a forensic handwriting expert. We compared my real signature with the one on the mortgage documents. The differences were obvious to a trained eye. The slant of the letters, the pressure of the stroke, tiny details that proved it was not my hand that had signed. We had solid proof of forgery. But Paige warned me it wouldn't be enough. We needed more. We needed to prove intent, that there was an elaborate plan to strip me of my assets. And for that, we needed more concrete evidence. That's when I remembered my phone. That old cell phone Stephen had given me 2 years ago, telling me it was so we could communicate better. I barely knew how to use it, but I had learned how to record calls after a neighbor showed me. For months, every time Stephen or Samantha called me to pressure me about the land, I recorded the conversation, not out of malice. Simply because their words confused me, they made me dizzy with legal terms I didn't understand, and I wanted to be able to listen to them again later, calmly. I never imagined those recordings would be my salvation. I gave the phone to Paige. She spent hours listening to every audio file. Her expression grew more serious with each recording. In one of them, Samantha was telling Stephen, thinking I couldn't hear them from the kitchen, "Once we have power of attorney, we'll put your mother in a cheap nursing home and sell everything. With $5 million, we can pay off the mortgage, buy another penthouse, and still have plenty left over to invest." My son's voice replied without hesitation, "My mother already lived her life. Now it's our turn to enjoy." Hearing those words recorded with the coldness of evidence hurt more than any yell. My son, the child I carried in my womb, whom I nursed, whom I raised with every ounce of my love, was talking about me as if I were a burden, as if my life no longer had value. But Paige was smiling. This is gold, Helen. With this and the forgery, we're not just going to win the case. We're going to make sure they face serious legal consequences. We spent weeks preparing the case. I continued to live on my property, working my land, but now with a different purpose. Every furrow I opened, every seed I planted, was an act of resistance. I was not going to let them take my home. I was not going to let them trample my dignity. And while Stephen and Samantha paraded around the city in their luxury car, sure of their victory, I was building my defense. I made another decision during those weeks. A decision that Paige initially tried to dissuade me from, but ultimately respected. I sold 9 of the 15 acres of my land. I sold them at a fair price to serious developers who wanted to build a residential project. The money, more than $3 million, I deposited into a bank account in my name, with Paige as a witness. That money was mine, legally earned, and it represented my freedom. I was no longer dependent on anyone. I was no longer the poor old woman my son thought he could manipulate. The other 6 acres, the part with my house and my main crops, I decided to donate, but not to Stephen. I donated them to a local farming co-op, a group of young farmers who wanted to preserve cultivation traditions and teach new generations. The donation would be effective after the trial, when everything was settled. It was my way of ensuring my legacy would continue, but in the hands of those who truly valued the land. When the day of the trial arrived, I was ready. I got up before dawn, as always. I took a long bath, trying to calm my nerves. I put on my best dress, a cream-colored one I had bought especially for the occasion. It wasn't elegant or expensive, but it was dignified. I pulled my hair back into a simple bun. I looked in the mirror and saw the woman I had been all my life. Hardworking, honest, strong. I wasn't going to change now. Paige picked me up early. During the drive to the courthouse, we reviewed the strategy one last time. She would do most of the talking. I only had to answer truthfully when asked. And above all, I had to remain calm, no matter what Stephen and Samantha said or did. We arrived at the courthouse an hour before the hearing. The building was imposing, all gray concrete and large windows. Inside, the air conditioning was so strong it made me shiver. We sat on a wooden bench to wait. Paige reviewed her documents one last time. I just watched people pass by. Hurried lawyers, nervous families, security guards who seemed bored of seeing so much human drama every day. And then I saw them arrive. Stephen and Samantha walked in as if they were movie stars. He was wearing an impeccable black suit that must have cost more than I earned in 6 months. She was wearing a beige pantsuit and towering heels that clicked against the marble floor. Behind them came Maxwell, their lawyer, a man in his 50s with perfectly combed silver hair and a leather briefcase that was probably worth more than my old truck. Stephen saw me first. His eyes met mine for a second, and I could see something that looked like discomfort, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Samantha whispered something in his ear, and he smiled. That smile I knew so well, the one he used as a child when he had done something wrong and was trying to hide it. They walked over to where we were sitting. My heart was beating so hard I thought everyone in the hallway could hear it. Paige squeezed my hand discreetly, giving me strength. Stephen and Samantha stopped in front of us. They didn't greet us. They just stood there, looking us up and down with that contempt they no longer bothered to hide. "You still have time to avoid this circus, Mom," Stephen said in a cold voice. "Sign the papers, admit you need help, and we all win. You'll have a quiet life in a nice place, and we'll take care of everything." Samantha nodded, adjusting her designer glasses. "It's for the best, Helen. At your age, you shouldn't be worrying about land and legal documents. Let us handle this. We're professionals." Her tone was so condescending I felt anger boil in my stomach. They spoke to me as if I were a foolish child, as if 63 years of life hadn't taught me anything. Paige was about to respond, but I put my hand on her arm. This time I wanted to speak. "I'm not signing anything," I said in a firm voice, looking directly into my son's eyes. "This circus, as you call it, was started by you. I just wanted to live in peace in my house, farming my land. But it wasn't enough for you to go live your life of luxury. You wanted to take the only thing I have." Stephen laughed bitterly. "The only thing you have? Mom, you have $5 million buried in the dirt while you live like a beggar. Do you know what we could do with that? Do you know how many opportunities you're wasting?" Samantha put her hand on Stephen's arm, calming him, but her eyes shone with the same venom. "What my husband is trying to say is that you're being selfish, Helen. Stephen gave you everything. He sacrificed his youth, his time, his resources for you. And now that he needs your help, you refuse." The words hit me like slaps. He sacrificed his youth? He gave me everything? Reality was so twisted in their minds that they no longer knew the difference between the truth and their own lies. I was about to answer, but Maxwell, the lawyer, intervened. He approached with measured steps, his presence imposing. "Mrs. Johnson," he said in a professional, cold voice, "I strongly recommend you reconsider your position. We have medical documentation suggesting cognitive decline. We have testimonies from neighbors concerned for your well-being. We have evidence that you cannot properly manage your assets. This case is won before it even starts. Save yourself the public humiliation and accept the settlement." Paige stood up, facing him. "Medical documentation? What doctor examined my client without her consent? What neighbors gave testimonies she never authorized? All you have is smoke and mirrors, counselor, and that will be proven in the courtroom." Maxwell smiled smugly. "You're very young, Counselor Paige. You still lack experience. In cases like these, the law favors those who can demonstrate financial management capability. And believe me, my client has all the resources to prove that he is more qualified than an old farm woman." The way he said "old farm woman" made me clench my fists. It wasn't just an insult to me. It was an insult to all women like me, who work the land, who break our backs, who build with our hands what they enjoy with their college degrees. But before I could respond, Samantha dropped the bomb they had been waiting to drop. She leaned in, lowering her voice so only we could hear, but loud enough for other lawyers nearby to catch it. "Besides, Helen, there's something you should know. That penthouse where we live, the $2 million one, has your signature as a co-signer. If we can't pay, the bank comes after you. So technically, you already owe us. You're already responsible for our debt. See? It's all connected. It's better if you cooperate." Her smile was pure malice. She thought she had me cornered. She thought that revelation would make me panic and give in. But what Samantha didn't know was that I already knew that information, and I had proof that the signature was a fake. It was then that they lost any trace of composure. Stephen took a step forward, his face red with rage. "You, planting corn and beans in the middle of nowhere," he said, raising his voice so everyone in the hallway could hear, "while my wife and I get the $2 million penthouse. All fair and square. Right, Mom?" His laugh was cruel, rehearsed to humiliate me. "You know what's funniest, Mom? You're going to be left with your insignificant patch of dirt, your poor people plants, while we enjoy the life we deserve, the life I earned. Because I actually went to college, I actually made something of myself. I'm actually worth something in this world." Samantha joined his laughter, covering her mouth with her perfectly manicured hand, but not really hiding anything. Her eyes looked at me with so much contempt it hurt my soul. Maxwell, the lawyer, was smiling too, checking his documents with the self-assurance of someone who had already won. Other lawyers in the hallway turned to look, some with curiosity, others with pity. I felt the heat of shame rise up my neck, coloring my cheeks. I felt tears threaten to fall, but I held them back. I would not give them that satisfaction. I would not cry in front of them. Not again. Paige was furious. I could see her hands balled into fists, her jaw tight. She was going to say something, probably something very harsh, but I stopped her. I put my hand on her arm and shook my head gently. "Let them," I whispered. "They'll get their answer inside." She understood. She took a deep breath, regaining her professional composure. Stephen and Samantha were still laughing, enjoying their moment of anticipated triumph. "Oh, Mom," Stephen said, wiping away a tear of laughter. "You should see your face right now. It's the same face you made when I asked for school money and you had to sell your chickens. Always so dramatic. Always so self-sacrificing. But guess what? Those sacrifices are over. Now it's my turn to take what I'm owed. Samantha hung on Stephen's arm, posing as if they were in a society magazine. We live in a penthouse overlooking the entire city. We have a brand new German car. We eat at restaurants where the cheapest dish costs what you make in a month. And you're still out there, in your little shack, without decent plumbing, without internet, without anything, and you still dare to deny us what is ours by right. He's your only son, your only family. Everything you have should be his. But no, you'd rather cling to your stupid farmer's pride. Maxwell snapped his briefcase shut. Ladies, we'll see you inside. I hope you've prepared your defense, because you're going to need it. The three of them walked away laughing, their voices echoing down the hall. Other lawyers looked at them, some with disapproval, but no one said anything. That's how the world of the courts works. The one with money, the one with power, the one with the best clothes and the best lawyer, that's the one who wins, or at least that's what everyone believes. I sat back down on the bench. My legs were trembling. Paige sat next to me, still breathing hard, trying to control her anger. Helen, what they just did is harassment. I can report it to the judge before the hearing starts. I shook my head. No. Let them think they've won. Let them feel confident. When Judge Bryant hears the recordings, when he sees the proof of forgery, when he finds out everything they did, their fall will be that much harder. Paige nodded slowly, understanding my strategy. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was justice. We spent the next few minutes in silence. I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, tried to calm my racing heart. I mentally rehearsed the words I would have to say when I was called to testify. I remembered every detail of the evidence we had. And above all, I remembered why I was there, not just to defend my land, but to defend my dignity. A court officer came out of one of the rooms. Case of Stephen Johnson versus Helen Johnson, courtroom 3. Please come in. My heart leaped. It was time. Paige gathered her documents and helped me to my feet. My legs felt weak, but I walked with my head held high. We entered the courtroom, and the atmosphere changed completely. It was a rectangular room with cream-colored walls and fluorescent lights that buzzed slightly. At the front, raised on a wooden platform, was Judge Bryant's bench. On the sides, tables for the lawyers and their clients. In the back, a few benches for the public, though there were only 3 unknown people watching. Probably law students or courthouse regulars. Paige guided me to our table. On the left. We sat down, and she began to organize our documents with military precision. Every folder in its place, every piece of evidence numbered and ready to present. I could only stare at my hands on the table, trying to control the shaking. On the other side, Stephen and Samantha entered as if they were celebrities. He whispered something in her ear, and they both smiled. Maxwell came in behind them, carrying his heavy briefcase, his expression serious and professional. They sat at their table with coordinated, perfectly rehearsed movements. Samantha took a small mirror from her purse and touched up her lipstick. Stephen adjusted his tie. They were acting as if this were a play where they already knew the ending. All rise, the officer announced. We all stood. Judge Bryant entered through a side door. He was a man in his mid-50s, gray hair combed back, reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck. His face showed no emotion. He sat in his chair, reviewed some papers in front of him, and finally looked at all of us. You may be seated, he said in a grave, tired voice. It was clear he had seen thousands of cases like this. Families destroyed by money, children against parents, greed disguised as concern. We sat in silence. The judge reviewed the file for a few minutes that felt like an eternity. The only sounds were the shuffling of paper and the buzzing of the lights. All right, the judge finally said, taking off his glasses and looking directly at Stephen. Mr. Johnson, you are petitioning for legal guardianship of your mother, Mrs. Helen Johnson, alleging mental incompetence to manage her assets. That is a serious accusation. I trust you have solid evidence to support it. Maxwell stood up immediately. Yes, Your Honor. We have extensive documentation proving that my client is better equipped to manage the family estate. Mrs. Johnson, with all due respect, is a 63-year-old woman with a basic education, no financial knowledge, who lives in precarious conditions despite owning assets valued at several $1,000,000. This clearly demonstrates her inability to make appropriate decisions. Judge Bryant raised an eyebrow. Is living humbly synonymous with mental incompetence, counselor? Maxwell faltered for a second but recovered quickly. No, Your Honor. But living in unnecessary poverty when one possesses sufficient resources suggests a lack of judgment. Furthermore, my client has a college education, business experience, and a proven capacity for asset management. He and his wife, who is also an attorney, are in a better position to preserve and grow this estate. The judge nodded slowly. I see. And what does the defense say? Paige stood up, her voice clear and firm. Your Honor, my client is a perfectly capable, lucid woman in full possession of her mental faculties. She has managed her property for decades without any problems. The fact that she chooses to live simply is a personal decision, not evidence of incompetence. Judge Bryant waved his hand. We will proceed with the statements. Counselor Maxwell, present your case. Maxwell smiled slightly, savoring his moment. He paced in front of the judge with measured steps, like an actor on a stage. Your Honor, this case is really very simple. My client, Mr. Stephen Johnson, is a son concerned for the well-being of his elderly mother. For years, he has watched as she refuses to improve her quality of life despite having the means to do so. She lives without the basic comforts of the 21st century. She refuses medical help. She refuses financial advice. And most worryingly, she has begun to show erratic behaviors that suggest cognitive decline. Paige was about to object, but Judge Bryant held up his hand. What kind of erratic behaviors, counselor? Maxwell pulled a folder from his briefcase. We have the testimony of Mrs. Sandra Hayes, a neighbor of Mrs. Johnson, who stated that on multiple occasions she has seen her talking to herself in the fields. We also have the testimony of Mr. Mark Jenkins, owner of the town's general store, who claims that Mrs. Johnson often forgets what she came to buy and gets confused with the change. I felt anger boil in my chest. Sandra was the nosy neighbor who had always been envious because my land was bigger than hers, and Mark, from the store, held a grudge against me because I once confronted him for overcharging me. Of course, Stephen had sought them out and probably paid for their false testimonies. Judge Bryant reviewed the documents. Anything else? Maxwell nodded enthusiastically. Yes, Your Honor. We also present a psychological evaluation conducted by Dr. Gregory Hayes, a certified clinical psychologist who, after interviewing close family members of Mrs. Johnson, concludes that she presents signs consistent with mild cognitive impairment. Paige shot to her feet. Objection, Your Honor. That evaluation was conducted without my client's consent or presence. It is completely inadmissible. Judge Bryant frowned. Counselor Maxwell, is it true this evaluation was done without directly examining Mrs. Johnson? Maxwell cleared his throat. Your Honor, in cases where the patient refuses to be evaluated, it is common practice to conduct evaluations based on the testimony of close third parties. Judge Bryant didn't look convinced, but gestured for him to continue. Maxwell, feeling victorious, continued his presentation. Furthermore, Your Honor, my client has proven to be an exemplary citizen, graduated with honors, a successful businessman, a responsible taxpayer. He and his wife have offered to care for Mrs. Johnson in their own home, provide her with top-quality medical care, and manage her assets professionally. It is a solution that benefits everyone. Mrs. Johnson would receive the care she needs, and the family estate would be properly preserved. Stephen nodded with every word from his lawyer, perfectly playing the part of the concerned son. Samantha wore a serious, almost sad expression, as if she truly cared about my well-being. Judge Bryant leaned back in his chair. Does the defense wish to cross-examine the plaintiff? Paige nodded. Yes, Your Honor. She stood and looked directly at Stephen. Mr. Johnson, when was the last time you visited your mother before initiating this legal process? Stephen blinked. He clearly hadn't expected that question. I visit my mother regularly. Regularly? Can you be more specific? Stephen looked to Maxwell for help, but the lawyer couldn't answer for him. Well, with my work, it's hard to find time, but answer the question, Mr. Johnson. When was the last time? His face reddened. About 3 months ago. 3 months? And before that? I don't know, maybe 6 months. Page walked to our table and picked up a document. Your Honor, I have here the phone records between Mr. Johnson and his mother for the last year. In total, there were 18 calls, all of them initiated by Mrs. Johnson, all of them lasting less than 5 minutes. Does this strike you as genuine concern for his mother's well-being? Stephen clenched his fists on the table. I have a busy life. That doesn't mean I don't care. Or it means you only care when there's money involved. Objection, Maxwell shouted. Counsel is speculating. Judge Bryant nodded. Sustained. Counselor Page, get to the point. She smiled faintly. She had already planted the seed of doubt. Mr. Johnson, you live in a penthouse valued at $2 million, correct? Yes. And how did you finance that purchase? Stephen hesitated. With a mortgage. A mortgage that is about to default and which you cannot pay. Maxwell was on his feet again. Objection. My client's financial situation is not relevant to this case. Page turned to the judge. It is completely relevant, Your Honor. We are trying to establish the true motive for this lawsuit. Judge Bryant thought for a moment. I'll allow the question. Mr. Johnson, answer. Stephen swallowed hard. His confidence was beginning to crack. We're having some temporary difficulties, but nothing we can't resolve. Temporary difficulties? According to my records, you are 3 mortgage payments behind. Your property is at risk of foreclosure. That is why you urgently need your mother's money. The silence in the room was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. Stephen opened his mouth, but no words came out. Samantha put her hand on his shoulder, trying to calm him, but her own face had gone pale. Maxwell cleared his throat, trying to regain control. Your Honor, my client's personal financial situation does not invalidate his legitimate concern for his mother. Page didn't miss a beat. Legitimate concern? Mr. Johnson? Is it true that you offered to put your mother in a nursing home? Stephen hesitated. I suggested she consider professional care options for her age. A nursing home that costs $300 a month on the outskirts of the city? Is that the top-quality care your lawyer mentioned? Samantha interjected from her seat. It was an affordable and practical option. Page turned to her. Mrs. Johnson, you are not being questioned at this time. But Judge Bryant held up his hand. Let her speak. Mrs. Johnson, you participated in the decision to sue your mother-in-law? Samantha stood up, nervously adjusting her suit. Of course. I am a lawyer, and it is my duty to protect my family's interests. And you considered stripping a 63-year-old woman of her property to be protecting her interests? We are not stripping her. We are helping her manage it better. How did you manage your own penthouse? The one you are about to lose for non-payment? Samantha pressed her lips together. Her facade of professionalism was beginning to crumble. Page returned to our table and picked up another document. Your Honor, there is something else the court needs to know. On the mortgage documents for the penthouse where Mr. Stephen and Mrs. Samantha live, my client's signature appears as the co-signer. Judge Bryant straightened his posture, clearly interested. Mrs. Johnson is the co-signer on their loan? According to the documents, yes. But there's a problem. Page paused dramatically. My client never signed those documents. She never gave her consent to be a co-signer. She was never informed of this financial obligation. The mood in the courtroom changed instantly. The judge leaned forward. Stephen and Samantha exchanged panicked glances. Maxwell turned pale. Are you accusing my clients of forgery? He asked in a shaky voice. I'm not accusing. I'm presenting evidence. Page pulled out a thick folder. I have here the expert analysis from a certified forensic handwriting expert who compared my client's signature on authentic documents with the signature that appears on the mortgage. The differences are obvious. The slant of the letters, the pressure of the stroke, the spacing. That is not Helen Johnson's signature. She handed copies to the judge and to Maxwell. I watched from my seat as Stephen began to sweat. Samantha was biting her lower lip, her perfect composure destroyed. Judge Bryant reviewed the documents carefully, comparing the signatures side by side. His eyes narrowed behind his glasses. This is very serious, Counselor Maxwell. Does your client have an explanation? Maxwell frantically flipped through the papers, looking for some legal escape. Your Honor, this is. We need time to verify these documents. This was not in the original file. Because you never thought she would have a defense, Paige replied firmly. You thought a farm woman with no education wouldn't have the resources or the knowledge to fight back? You were wrong. Judge Bryant tapped his gavel lightly. We will take a 15-minute recess. I want both parties to review this document. When we return, I expect clear explanations. We all stood as the judge left the courtroom. As soon as the door closed behind him, Stephen exploded. He turned to me, his eyes full of rage. What did you do? How did you get all this? His voice trembled with fury and fear. Samantha tried to calm him, pulling on his arm. Stephen, not here. Let's go outside. But he yanked his arm away. No. I want to know what's going on. Mom, you can't afford a handwriting expert. You barely have enough to eat. Who is helping you? Who is putting these ideas in your head? I stood up slowly, looking him in the eye. For the first time in months, I didn't feel sadness when I looked at him. I only felt disappointment. No one is putting ideas in my head, Stephen. I decided to defend myself. Because what you are trying to do isn't helping me. It's robbing me. Robbing? Now I'm a thief? His voice echoed in the empty courtroom. I'm the one who supported you all these years. I'm the one who visited you, even though I was embarrassed for my friends to see where you lived. I'm the one who put up with your smell of dirt and your filthy hands every time you hugged me. Those words pierced my chest like knives. My own son, admitting he was embarrassed by his mother. Samantha pulled him harder. Stephen, stop! They're recording! She pointed toward the security cameras in the courtroom, but the damage was done. Maxwell was in a corner, talking frantically on his phone, probably consulting with other partners at his firm. Paige guided me into the hallway. We needed air. We left the courtroom and sat on the same benches as before. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. They were shaking from something else. Liberation, maybe. I was finally seeing my son for who he really was. Not the boy I carried in my arms. Not the young man I applauded at his graduation. But the selfish, cruel man he had become. Are you okay? Paige asked softly. I nodded, wiping away a tear that had escaped. I'm fine. We have more. She smiled. We have so much more. The next few minutes we spent reviewing the rest of the evidence. Paige explained every detail, every document, every recording we would present. I listened intently, nodding, mentally preparing for the second half of the hearing. Down the hall, I saw Stephen and Samantha arguing heatedly with Maxwell. The lawyer was gesticulating with frustration. It was obvious his clients hadn't told him about the forged signature. Now he was in an impossible position, defending the indefensible. Several minutes later, the court officer came out again. The judge is ready. Please return to the courtroom. We all filed back in. The atmosphere was different now. The arrogant confidence from Stephen's side was gone. Judge Bryant entered, and we all rose. He sat, arranged his documents, and looked at us with a serious expression. Counselor Maxwell, do you have an explanation for the signature discrepancy? Maxwell stood, visibly uncomfortable. Your Honor, my client states that his mother gave her verbal consent to be the co-signer. It is possible that, due to her advanced age, she simply does not remember. It was a weak argument, and everyone knew it. Judge Bryant looked unconvinced. You're telling me a bank accepted verbal consent for a $2 million loan guarantee? Your Honor, I was not present for that transaction. And your client? The judge looked directly at Samantha. Mrs. Johnson, you are a lawyer. You know perfectly well that a co-signer agreement requires proper documentation. Samantha stood, trembling. My mother-in-law agreed. Perhaps there was an error at the bank when processing the paperwork. An error that coincidentally benefited you. The judge's voice was sharp. Samantha didn't answer. She sat down quickly, avoiding the judge's gaze. Paige seized the moment. Your Honor, I have more evidence the court needs to hear. Evidence that proves this case was never about my client's well-being. It was always about the money. The judge nodded. Proceed. Paige took out a small audio recorder. With the court's permission, I would like to play a recording. Stephen turned pale. Samantha closed her eyes. Maxwell dropped his pen. Judge Bryant gestured his approval. Paige pressed the play button. The silence in the room was absolute. Only the faint hiss of the device could be heard before the voices began. First, there was background noise, dishes clinking, water running. My kitchen. Then, Samantha's voice, clear and sharp. Once we have power of attorney, we'll put your mother in a cheap nursing home and sell everything. With $5 million, we can pay off the mortgage, buy another penthouse, and still have plenty left over to invest. There was a pause. Then Stephen's voice. My son's voice replied without any doubt. My mother already lived her life. Now it's our turn to enjoy. The impact was immediate. Judge Bryant took off his glasses and stared hard at Stephen and Samantha. The three people watching from the back benches murmured among themselves. Maxwell closed his eyes and slowly shook his head. Paige stopped the recording. This conversation took place 4 months ago in my client's home during a visit that was supposedly to check on her well-being. The judge leaned back in his chair, processing what he had just heard. Do you have anything to say to that? Stephen tried to speak, but his voice came out broken. That was taken out of context. Context? The judge raised an eyebrow. In what context is planning to put your mother in a cheap nursing home to sell her property acceptable? Samantha stood up abruptly. Your Honor, that recording was made without our consent. It's illegal. Paige replied immediately. In this state, it is a one-party consent state for recording conversations. My client was in her own home. The recording is completely legal and admissible. The judge nodded. Counselor Paige is correct. The recording is valid. Samantha sank into her chair, defeated. Stephen had his face in his hands, as if he wanted to disappear. Maxwell looked like he was seriously considering quitting the case right then and there. But Paige wasn't finished. There's more, Your Honor. She pressed play again. This time it was another conversation. The sound of an engine could be heard, probably inside a car. It was Stephen's voice, on the phone. Maxwell, I need you to find a legal way to declare my mother incompetent. I don't care how. Make up testimonies. Get a doctor who will sign whatever is necessary. I'll pay you whatever you ask. But I need that land now. Maxwell's voice replied from the phone. Stephen, that is ethically questionable. Don't give me ethics. Do you want the case or not? Because I have other lawyers waiting. There was a sigh from the other end. All right, I'll see what I can do. The recording ended. The silence was deafening. Maxwell stood up slowly, his face red with anger and shame. Your Honor, I never. That conversation. But he couldn't finish the sentence. The damage was done. Judge Bryant looked at him with a mixture of disappointment and disgust. Counselor Maxwell, are you admitting that you fabricated evidence for this case? No. That recording. I need to verify its authenticity. Paige stepped in. I have here the forensic audio analysis confirming the recording has not been altered. The voices match the voice samples of both Mr. Stephen Johnson and you, Counselor Maxwell. She handed another document to the judge. Judge Bryant reviewed the document carefully. His expression grew more serious with every line he read. Finally, he looked up. Counselor Maxwell, you are suspended from this case, effective immediately. Furthermore, I will be forwarding this evidence to the State Bar Association for a professional conduct investigation. Maxwell opened his mouth to protest, but the judge held up his hand. I don't want to hear another word from you. Remove yourself from this courtroom. Now. Maxwell gathered his documents with trembling hands. He gave Stephen and Samantha one last look, a mixture of rage and reproach, then walked quickly out of the room. The door shut behind him with a solid thud. Stephen was paralyzed in his seat. Samantha was crying silently, the tears ruining her perfect makeup. The judge turned to them. Mr. Johnson, Mrs. Johnson. This is one of the most despicable cases I have seen in my 25 years on the bench. You not only attempted to strip a vulnerable woman of her property, but you also forged documents, planned fraud, and corrupted the legal process. His voice boomed with authority and indignation. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Stephen finally found his voice, but it was weak, broken. Your Honor, we needed the money. We're in debt. I didn't want to hurt my mother. The judge looked at him harshly. You didn't want to hurt your mother? Planning to lock her in a nursing home against her will isn't hurtful? Stealing her property isn't hurtful? Humiliating her publicly isn't hurtful? Stephen hung his head, speechless. Samantha tried to speak. Your Honor, we can reach an agreement. We can withdraw the lawsuit and forget all of this. The judge shook his head. This is no longer just a civil dispute, Mrs. Johnson. This is potentially criminal. Forgery, attempted fraud, conspiracy. The district attorney's office will be very interested in this case. Samantha turned even paler. Her hands trembled as she fumbled for a tissue in her purse. Paige stood up. Your Honor, my client has a statement she would like to make. The judge nodded, looking at me for the first time with something that looked like respect. Go ahead, Mrs. Johnson. I stood up slowly. My legs were no longer shaking. My hands were steady. I looked directly at Stephen as I spoke. I worked my entire life to give you the best. I sold my land, my time, my health, all so you could have opportunities I never had. And I did it with love, never expecting anything in return, but what I did expect was respect. I expected you to remember where you came from. I expected you to value the sacrifice. My voice broke slightly, but I continued. When I heard you on those recordings, when I heard you say that I had already lived my life, I felt like the son I raised had died, because the boy I knew would never have said that. He would never have conspired to lock up his mother. He would never have forged documents. He would never have humiliated me the way you did today in the hallway. Stephen had tears streaming down his cheeks, but he said nothing. I planted corn and beans my whole life, and you mocked that. But those plants taught me something you never learned. What you sow, you reap. You sowed greed, lies, and cruelty, and now you are reaping the consequences. I turned to the judge. Your Honor, I don't want revenge. I just want to live in peace on my land, what's left of it, and I want justice to be done. The judge nodded solemnly. Mrs. Johnson, thank you for your statement. He turned to Stephen and Samantha. I have heard enough. I am ready to issue my ruling. The room grew even tenser. Paige took my hand discreetly. Stephen and Samantha straightened in their seats, waiting for the inevitable. Judge Bryant picked up his gavel and held it in the air. In the case of Stephen Johnson versus Helen Johnson, this court finds entirely in favor of the defendant. The gavel strike echoed in the room like a thunderclap. Stephen closed his eyes. Samantha sobbed audibly. The judge continued. The petition for guardianship is denied in its entirety. Mrs. Helen Johnson is declared fully competent to manage her own assets. Furthermore, I am ordering a criminal investigation be opened for forgery and attempted fraud against Mr. Stephen Johnson and Mrs. Samantha Johnson. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The fraudulent cosigner agreement is declared null and void. Mrs. Johnson has no legal obligation toward the plaintiff's mortgage debt. Samantha's head snapped up. What? But then we'll lose everything. The judge looked at her coldly. You should have thought of that before you committed fraud. He turned to me. Mrs. Johnson, do you wish to press additional charges or file a civil suit for damages? I looked at my son. He was broken, destroyed, tears running freely down his face. For a moment, I saw the 13-year-old boy who cried in my arms when his father died. But that boy was gone. No, Your Honor, I replied calmly. I don't want anything from them anymore. The judge nodded. Very well, this case is closed. The gavel struck one more time. Stephen stood up, stumbling. Samantha tried to hold him, but he pushed her away roughly. This is your fault, he said in a hoarse voice. Your damned plan. Your damned ideas. Samantha recoiled as if she'd been slapped. My fault? You were the one who wanted the money. You were the one who pushed me to get that penthouse. They began to argue right there, in the middle of the courtroom, in front of the judge, in front of everyone. Their voices rose, blaming each other, destroying in minutes what was left of their marriage. Judge Bryant slammed his gavel. Order! Remove yourselves from my courtroom immediately before I hold you in contempt. An officer approached to escort them out. Stephen looked at me one last time before he left. His eyes were red, swollen, filled with something that might have been regret, or maybe just self-pity. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. What could he say after everything he had done? Samantha walked ahead of him, clutching her expensive purse like a life raft. Her heels clicked on the floor in hurried, desperate steps, eager to get out of there. The door closed behind them, and silence filled the room. It was a different silence than before, no longer heavy with tension, but with resolution, with justice served. Judge Bryant looked at me with a softer expression. "Mrs. Johnson, I am deeply sorry for what you have had to endure. No mother should ever face this." I nodded, not trusting my voice to reply. "If you need any further support from the judicial system, do not hesitate to ask. I will also recommend the district attorney's office be especially diligent in their investigation." He stood, signaling the session was officially over. We all rose. The judge left through the side door, and I remained standing by my table, trying to process everything that had just happened. "Page heugt me. We did it, Helen. We won." "We won," I repeated, though the word felt strange in my mouth. Had I really won? I had kept my land, my freedom, my dignity, but I had lost my son. Or maybe I had lost him a long time ago and just hadn't wanted to accept it. Paige began to gather all the documents, organizing them carefully in her briefcase. "There are a few more steps we need to take. We need to register the judgment, make sure the criminal investigation proceeds, and officially nullify your name from any documents related to their mortgage." I heard her words, but my mind was elsewhere. I was thinking of Stephen as a child, of how he would hug me after school, of how he used to tell me I was the best mom in the world. We left the courtroom together. The hallway was emptier now. A few people waiting for other cases looked at us curiously. They had probably heard Stephen and Samantha's shouts. We walked toward the building's exit. The sunlight hit me as I stepped outside, warm and bright. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with fresh air. It was the first time in months I had breathed without feeling a weight on my chest. "Can I give you a ride home?" Pei asked. "I think I'll walk for a bit," I said. "I need to think." She understood. She gave me a long, tight hug. "You are the strongest woman I know, Helen. What you did today wasn't easy." "It didn't feel like strength," I admitted. "It felt like survival." Paige smiled sadly. "Sometimes they're the same thing." We said our goodbyes, and she headed to the parking lot. I started walking through the town's streets. I was in no hurry. I had nowhere specific to go. I just needed to move, to feel my legs carrying me away from that building, from that room, from those memories. I passed by shops I had known for decades. The bakery where I used to buy donuts for Stephen when he was a boy. The drugstore where I got his medicine when he was sick. The bookstore where I bought him his first storybook. Every corner of this town held memories of the two of us, of when we were a team, of when I was his hero. I reached the town square and sat on a bench under the shade of an old tree. I watched people pass by, mothers with their young children, playing, laughing, grandparents feeding pigeons, young couples holding hands. Life went on, indifferent to my personal pain. My phone vibrated in my purse. I pulled it out and saw a text from an unknown number. "I hope you're happy. You've ruined us. You don't have a son anymore." It was from Stephen. I stared at the message for a long time. My fingers hovered over the keypad, writing and deleting replies over and over. Finally, I wrote, "I didn't ruin anything. You lost it all by yourself when you decided money was worth more than your mother." I hit send before I could change my mind. The reply came almost immediately. "Go to hell." Those were his last words to me. I blocked the number, not out of anger, but out of necessity. I needed to close that door so I could move on. I stayed in the park until the sun began to set. The shadows grew long, and the air cooled. It was time to go home. My real home. I walked to the bus stop that would take me back to the countryside. The ride took almost an hour. I watched out the window as the town faded away, as the buildings turned into trees, as the pavement turned to dirt. And with every mile we drove, I felt I could breathe easier. I got off the bus on the dirt road that led to my property. The sun was setting, painting the sky in oranges and pinks. I walked the last quarter mile to my house. My little wooden house. My home. As I got closer, I saw my cornstalks swaying in the breeze, my beans climbing their poles. Everything was just as I had left it this morning, but I was different. I went inside and set my purse on the table. The silence was comforting now. It wasn't the silence of loneliness, but of peace. I made myself an herbal tea from my garden. I sat in my rocking chair on the porch, watching the night slowly arrive. My phone rang. This time it was Paige. "How are you?" she asked with genuine concern. "I'm all right," I answered, and it was the truth. "I'm home. I wanted to let you know," the farming co-op called. "They are so excited about the 6-acre donation. They want to meet with you next week to plan how they'll use the land." I smiled. At least something good would come of all this. That sounds perfect. We talked a little more about the next legal steps, about how to proceed with the criminal investigation if the DA decided to move forward, but I told her I wouldn't push for it. If Stephen and Samantha faced consequences, it would be the system's decision, not mine. I was done fighting. That night, lying in my bed, I looked at the wooden ceiling, familiar with every crack and stain. I thought about everything that had happened, about how a mother's love can be infinite but not indestructible, about how ambition can corrode even the most sacred bonds, about how money reveals who we really are when no one is watching. Stephen chose the money. He chose the penthouse, the luxury, the image. And in doing so, he lost the only thing that truly mattered: his humanity, his honor, his family. I chose my dignity, my right to live how I wanted, where I wanted, without asking anyone's permission. And though the loss of my son hurt deeply, I knew I had done the right thing. I fell asleep that night with the windows open, listening to the sounds of the countryside. The crickets singing, the wind whispering through the leaves, the occasional bark of a distant dog. These were the sounds of my life, the sounds of my home, and no one ever again was going to take them from me. The next day, I woke to the rooster's crow, as always. I got up, put on my work clothes, and went out to my crops. There were weeds to pull, plants to water, soil to work. Life went on. My hands sank into the damp earth, feeling its familiar texture. This was my purpose. This was my place. The days passed, and I slowly found my rhythm again. I rose with the sun, worked my crops, cooked my simple meals, and in the evenings, I sat on the porch to watch the sunset. Paige visited me every week to keep me updated on the legal process. The district attorney's office had decided to press criminal charges against Stephen and Samantha. Forgery was a serious felony. The bank, upon learning of the fraud, had launched its own investigation. The penthouse was in foreclosure. The entire empire of luxury they had built was collapsing like a house of cards. One afternoon, about a month after the trial, I had an unexpected visit. I heard the sound of a car coming up the dirt road. I looked out and saw a vehicle I didn't recognize. A man and a young woman got out. He was in his 30s, with a neat beard and simple work clothes. She was younger, with her hair in a braid and wearing work boots. "Mrs. Johnson?" the man asked, approaching with a warm smile. "I'm Michael, the coordinator for the farming co-op, and this is Megan, our organic crop specialist." I welcomed them in and made coffee. We sat at my small kitchen table as they explained their plans for the 6 acres I had donated. "We want to create a training center for young farmers," Michael explained enthusiastically. "Teach them traditional farming techniques, native seed preservation, sustainable agriculture." Megan added, "Your land is perfect. It has good irrigation, fertile soil, and it's close enough to town for students to get to." As they spoke, I felt my heart fill with warmth. My land, the land of my parents and grandparents, would continue to be productive. It would continue to feed people. But more than that, it would educate the next generation. "There's one more thing," Michael said, a bit shyly. "We'd like to name the center in your honor. The Helen Johnson Agricultural Training Center. If you're okay with that." Tears filled my eyes. They weren't tears of sadness, but of something much deeper. It was gratitude, validation, purpose. "I would be honored," I managed to say, my voice breaking. We spent the next few hours walking the property. I showed them where my parents had planted the first fruit trees. I pointed out the areas with the best drainage. I shared techniques with them that I had learned from my mother and she from hers. Knowledge passed down through generations, now being documented and preserved. When they left that afternoon, I felt different. I was no longer just a woman who had defended her land. I was someone whose legacy would continue long after I was gone. News of the case had spread through town. Some people looked at me with pity when I went to the market, others with admiration. Mark, the store owner who had given false testimony against me, couldn't look me in the eye. One day, I worked up the courage to approach him. "Mark, I know Stephen paid you to say those lies about me." He turned pale. "Mrs. Johnson, I needed the money. My store was in trouble." "We all need money, Mark. But that doesn't justify betrayal." He hung his head. "You're right. I'm so sorry." I didn't say anything else. Sometimes apologies don't change anything, but they need to be said all the same. Sandra, my neighbor, was less lucky with me. When I saw her on the road, I simply turned and took another path. She had envied me my whole life and had taken the first chance to hurt me. I didn't owe her my time or my forgiveness. Some people don't deserve second chances. Paige called me on a Friday evening. "Helen, I have news. Samantha has been temporarily suspended from practicing law while the bar investigates her involvement in the fraud, and Stephen lost his job. The company didn't want to be associated with someone under criminal investigation." I waited to feel satisfaction, even joy at their downfall. But I just felt empty. "How are you doing with all this?" Paige asked gently. "I don't know," I admitted. "He's still my son. Part of me still wants to protect him. That makes you human, Helen. It doesn't make you weak." I was grateful for her words. After we hung up, I sat in my rocking chair and thought about Stephen. Where was he now? Had he learned anything from this? Or was he still blaming me for his failure? I would probably never know. I had closed that door and didn't plan on opening it again. The money from the sale of the 9 acres was safe in my bank account, more money than I had ever had in my life. Paige had helped me invest a portion of it wisely. I donated another part to the town church to fix the roof that had been leaking for years, and I kept the rest for emergencies. For my old age, to have the security I never had. One morning, about 2 months after the trial, I was watering my plants when I saw a familiar figure walking up the path to my house. My heart stopped. It was Stephen. He was alone. No Samantha, no lawyers, no arrogance. He was wearing simple clothes, jeans, and a shirt I recognized as one I'd given him years ago. He looked gaunt, thinner, with deep dark circles under his eyes. He stopped a few yards away, as if afraid to come closer. "Mom," he said, his voice hoarse. It was the first time in months he had called me that, without sarcasm, without venom. Just Mom. I set the watering can down, but I didn't move toward him. I waited. I came to. I don't know why I came. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit he'd had since he was a boy. "Samantha left me. She moved in with her parents. Says she'll never forgive me for ruining her career." He paused. I lost everything. The job, the house, my friends, everything. I still said nothing. He continued. "Everyone turned their back on me when I needed them most, and then I realized, the only person who never turned their back on me, the only one who was always there, was the person I hurt the most." Tears began to roll down his cheeks. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry I humiliated you. I'm sorry I tried to steal from you. I'm sorry I said you'd already lived your life. I was a monster, and I have no excuse." My heart wanted to run to him, to hold him, to tell him all was forgiven. But my head knew things weren't that simple. "Did you come because you're really sorry, or because you have no one else left?" I asked, my voice firm. He was silent, processing my question. "I don't know," he finally admitted. "Maybe both. But I know that what I did to you was unforgivable. I don't expect you to forgive me. I needed you to know that I'm sorry." I took a deep breath. "I will forgive you one day, Stephen, because holding on to that anger only hurts me. But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, and it definitely doesn't mean things go back to the way they were." He nodded, wiping his tears on the back of his hand. "Can I ask you something?" he said after a moment. I nodded. "Why did you donate the land to the co-op instead of giving it to me, even after everything? Because they value it for what it is. You only valued it for what you could get from it. My answer was simple but true. That land is going to educate young people who actually want to learn how to work it, to respect it, to make it produce. You just wanted to sell it to the highest bidder. Stephen looked down. You're right. About everything. We stood in silence for a while. He looked at the ground. I looked at my plants. Finally, he spoke again. I'm leaving the city. I got a job at a small company in another state. Nothing glamorous, but it's honest. I'm glad, I said, and I meant it. I need to start over. Be someone different. He paused. Do you think I can ever be the son you deserved? My heart broke a little. Stephen, you were the son I deserved, until you chose not to be. If you want to earn that back, it's up to you. It's about the choices you make from now on. He nodded slowly. He took a few cautious steps closer. Can I hug you? I didn't answer with words. I just opened my arms. He came forward and I held him. He smelled different, no longer of expensive cologne, but of simple soap. He felt thinner in my arms. He cried on my shoulder, like he used to as a child when he'd had a bad day at school. I let him cry. I said nothing, made no promises I couldn't keep. I just held him, because despite everything, he was still my son. After a while, he pulled away, wiping his eyes in embarrassment. Thank you for letting me come, he said hoarsely. I don't know if I'll be back soon. I need to fix my life first. That's okay, I replied. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, you know where to find me. I'll be right here, on my land, planting corn and beans. He gave a sad smile at the reference to his own cruel words. I'll be proud to say my mother plants corn and beans. He turned to go but stopped. One more thing. The judge was right. You're the strongest person I know, and I was a fool for not seeing it sooner. He walked back down the dirt path, his shoulders slumped, his steps slow. I watched him go until he was a small figure on the horizon. I didn't know if I would see him again. I didn't know if he would really change, or if he was just saying what he thought I wanted to hear. But I had planted a seed. And like any seed, only time would tell if it would grow. I went back to my plants, to my routine, to my life. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months. The farming co-op began construction on the training center. They came to consult me constantly about design decisions, about what to plant where, about how to organize the spaces. They made me feel useful, valued, important. One day, Michael arrived with a surprise. He had a group of 15 young people with him, all between 18 and 25, with bright eyes and hands eager to learn. Mrs. Johnson, these are our first students. We thought it would be fitting if you gave them their first class. I was speechless. Me, who had barely finished grade school, was going to teach. But then I understood. I wouldn't be teaching from books. I would be teaching from life, from experience, from generations of knowledge passed from mother to daughter. We spent that afternoon in the field. I taught them how to identify the best soil for each type of seed, how to read the signs of the weather, how to be patient with the earth, because the earth is wise and generous only to those who respect it. Megan took notes frantically, documenting every word. The students asked questions, their faces full of genuine curiosity. One of them, a young man named Alex, told me, "My family lost our farm 10 years ago. My dad works in the city now and hates every minute of it. I want to get back what we lost. I want to go back to the land." His words reminded me why all this mattered. The land wasn't just property. It was identity. It was history. It was future. That evening, exhausted but happy, I sat on my porch as always. But this time, I felt different. I was no longer just Helen, the lonely farmer betrayed by her son. I was Helen, the teacher. Helen, the founder. Helen, whose name would be on a center that would educate hundreds, maybe thousands, of young people in the years to come. My phone vibrated. It was a text from Paige. The DA's office reached a plea deal with Stephen and Samantha. Probation, community service, and heavy fines. No prison time. I read the message several times. I relieved. I didn't want my son in prison. I wanted him to learn, to change, to become a better person. Maybe this would give him that chance. I replied, "Thank you for letting me know. I'm at peace with that." And it was true. I was at peace. Paige replied, "You're an extraordinary woman, Helen. Most people would want revenge. You want healing." I wasn't extraordinary. I was just a tired woman who had fought enough and now wanted to live the rest of her days in quiet. The months kept passing. The construction on the center progressed well. I continued to give informal classes to the students. Some weekends, larger groups would come to visit, whole families interested in learning about sustainable farming. My little house filled with life, with voices, with laughter. I didn't feel alone anymore. One spring afternoon, almost a year after the trial, I was planting a new row of beans when I heard my phone ring. It was a number I didn't recognize, but with an area code from the state where Stephen had moved. I hesitated before answering. "Mom?" It was his voice, but it sounded different, more mature, calmer. "Stephen, I know I said I wouldn't call until I was ready. I think I'm ready, or at least readier than I was." I sat down on the ground, among my plants. "How are you?" "Good, better. I have a steady job, a small apartment, but it's clean. I started therapy." He paused. "I'm learning a lot about myself, about why I did what I did." "I'm glad," I said honestly. "Samantha and I officially divorced last month. It was necessary. We were toxic together. And now? Now I'm alone. And it's okay. I need to learn to be alone. To value myself without the luxury, without the image." His voice sounded genuine. "Mom, I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but can I visit next month? Just for a day. I want to show you who I'm trying to be." My heart sped up. I was afraid of being hurt again, but I also had hope. "You can come," I said finally. "But Stephen, if you come, it has to be because you truly want to reconnect, not because you need something." "I know, and I promise. I just want to see you. I just want you to know I'm changing." We talked a little more. He told me about his job at a small accounting firm. Nothing glamorous, as he said, but honest. He told me about his one-bedroom apartment, so different from the penthouse. He told me about his therapy sessions, where he was finally confronting his greed, his need to impress, his shame over his humble origins. When we hung up, I sat among my plants for a long time. The sun was setting, painting the sky in impossible colors, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something like hope for my son. Maybe people really could change. Maybe the seeds of redemption I had planted that day, when I finally hugged him, were beginning to sprout. A month later, Stephen arrived as promised. But this time, he didn't pull up in a luxury car. He came on a public bus, walking the last stretch of the road just like anyone else. He wore simple jeans and a cotton shirt. He brought a small bag with simple gifts. Some bread from the local bakery where he lived now, a book on agriculture he thought I might like, and a handwritten letter. We spent the day together. I showed him the training center, now almost complete. His eyes filled with tears when he saw my name on the sign. "You made more of your life than I ever will with mine," he said with genuine admiration. I didn't contradict him. Maybe he was right. We ate lunch together at my small kitchen table. Simple food I had cooked: beans, rice, cornbread, a salad from my garden. He ate with appetite, without complaints, without comparisons to expensive restaurants. We talked about everything and nothing. About his new friends at work. About my students at the co-op. About life. Simpler now for both of us, but somehow more real. When it was time for him to leave, he hugged me for a long time. "Thank you for giving me another chance," he whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on me when I gave you so many reasons to." "I never gave up on you, Stephen. You gave up on me. But I'm glad you found your way back." He walked back to town to catch his bus. This time, as I watched him walk away, I didn't feel emptiness. I felt peace. I didn't know if our relationship would ever be what it was. Probably not. Too much had happened, too many wounds that would heal but would leave scars. But maybe we could build something new. That night, sitting on my porch under a sky full of stars, I thought about the journey I had taken. I had started as a frightened woman, being sued by her own son, facing the possibility of losing everything. And now, a year later, I had kept my dignity, my land, my freedom. I had created a legacy that would outlive me. I had found a purpose in teaching others. And maybe, just maybe, I was getting my son back. I planted corn and beans my whole life. Stephen had mocked that, believing it was insignificant. But now I understood the truth. When you plant with love, with respect, with patience, the harvest always comes. Sometimes the harvest is food, sometimes it's money, and sometimes the most important harvest is dignity. Judge Bryant was right that day in the courtroom. Justice does come. Not always quickly, not always in the way we expect, but it comes. For those who have the courage to fight, for those who refuse to be trampled, for those who hold on to their dignity even when everyone is betting against them. Stephen and Samantha laughed in that courthouse hallway, so sure of their victory. But when the judge announced his ruling, those smiles vanished. Even their lawyer was stunned, because they learned a lesson that everyone eventually learns. You can underestimate a farm woman, you can mock her calloused hands and her simple life, but you should never, ever underestimate her strength. I closed my eyes, breathing in the cool country air. Tomorrow, I would wake up with the Sunday, I would water my plants, I would teach another class. I would live another day on my land, on my terms, with my dignity intact. And that was more than enough.